What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Randomness is pretty much always been a part of gaming, whether you're playing an esport or a board game, and the same goes for League of Legends to some extent. Now, when a lot of players hear the word random, people tend to assume the worst, which definitely does make sense because it often can be. But what a lot of people don't understand, or potentially don't understand though, is the difference between certain types of randomness and how it can actually be used to keep things fresh without stopping you from being in control of what's actually happening. Riot Ghostcrawler did an awesome piece on the topic sharing Riot's perception themselves of randomness, and I definitely wanted to take a look at it and break down the actual in-depth design of variants and things that Riot potentially needs to address. And this video is going to be sponsored by RapidX Gaming Chairs. Get 10% off your own chair with the code Curios. I've personally been using their chair myself, and it's been an awesome improvement from the previous brand of gaming chair that I had before. Check them out at rapidx.io or at the link in the description. And if you guys enjoyed the video, definitely hit that like button, and if you don't enjoy the video, feel free to hit that dislike button too, and let's get started. So the first thing I definitely wanted to address is that Riot definitely knows that randomness that interferes with the game is a bad thing. Especially in this sort of PvP environment, no one at Riot wants their players to feel like they just did everything right just to find out that the game rolled the dice against them and decided that they don't deserve to win. At the same time, some randomness is still kind of necessary to keep the game fresh and really to stop things from being repetitive, and it all comes down to the two different types of randomness. Ghostcrawler refers to input and output randomness as the two forms of variance in game. So input randomness is what is described as random things that happen before a game, or like random things that happen before you as a player act on them. A good example of this is the elemental dragons. You know which dragon is going to spawn, so although it's definitely random, it doesn't necessarily have a negative effect on the game itself. That's because instead of actually determining your gameplay, you build your strategy around it, you adapt to it in order to decide what to do during a game, so you still have full control over the situation. Let's say, for example, you play two different games. Maybe one has an Infernal Drake spawn first, and the other one has maybe a Cloud Drake spawn first. In the first game, you might decide with your team to try and get that first dragon and play around it and really contest it heavily, whereas in the second game, you would maybe decide that's a little bit less important, so you instead focus on lane objectives or something like that. Even though you're playing two games of League of Legends, heck, maybe even if you play with the exact same players and champions, because the drakes have been automatically or randomly generated, it changes the way that you approach the game, which means that instead of playing the same game twice, things are going to go a little bit differently, there's going to be some variance, and you potentially avoid or help avoid the feeling of it being repetitive. This is what input randomness provides, and although it can definitely go too far, it's what we would consider or classify as the good type of randomness, or the acceptable type of randomness. Another good example that Riot Ghostcrawler provides is a comparison to a game that involves a lot of randomness, and that is Texas Hold'em Poker. And in poker, there is a lot of information that you know about. You know the cards in your own personal hand, you know the cards that have been revealed on the board so far, but throughout the game, it's essentially random what the next card could be or what the next card you're going to get is, and that doesn't necessarily make poker a bad game. In fact, it does actually introduce a ton of strategy because when you're playing poker, players have to adapt their strategies based on those random factors. Being able to adapt your strategy based on random factors is a part of what it takes to master League of Legends. You're going to get things like mechanics, map awareness, counter-picking in the draft phase, for example, and being able to always adapt your strategy to a bunch of different things, even potentially random pre-generated things, is just another part of the game and another part of the strategy. On the flip side of the coin though, you have what is defined as output randomness, and it's probably best described as a player making a decision or doing some sort of action, and then the game pretty much rolling the dice against them to determine the outcome of that action itself. If a player does 100% of the things that they personally had the power to control perfectly, it should never be possible for randomness or some random chance to just ruin everything for them. And that's what output randomness can potentially do, and essentially it is classified as what is the bad or negative, or at least the more conflicting side of randomness in general. So a game that's probably well known for a lot of output randomness in its design is going to be Hearthstone. I mean, for sure, over a large number of games played, the number of games ruined by randomness isn't necessarily enough to stop good players from being good in Hearthstone and bad players from being bad, but players aren't invested in, 100 games at a time. Players care about the one individual game that they're playing as they're playing it. And losing a Hearthstone game to RNG or to some randomness that happens that's outside of your control and was essentially just blind luck for your opponent is usually pretty frustrating. That's not to say that all output randomness is bad for games though. Some genres like maybe tabletop Dungeons and Dragons are potentially unplayable without output randomness, since you kind of just need to be able to roll dice to play the game. And some actions are gonna inevitably roll high or roll low. That being said though, Dungeons & Dragons is not a competitive game where you're trying to demonstrate your skills, so the same concerns don't really apply whatsoever, right? And Riot have said that they want to keep output randomness in their game to just an absolute minimum, really, to avoid the bad situations or the situations that feel really bad that you get when it happens, which is definitely good to hear, and it's definitely the right way to go about things in my opinion, although it does kind of make you wonder why critical strikes are still in the game actually, probably one of the very few instances of potential output randomness. Now, games being ruined by crit chance is something that I would say is pretty infrequent for the most part, but the fact that it does happen at all can potentially ruin the match for a player in its situation, and it's, at least on paper, is not a healthy form of randomness compared to something like the elemental dragons or even plants, honestly. It can be pretty frustrating with crits in the game, and a lot of players are potentially advocating removing crit chance for a different mechanic instead, but there's a thing to crit chance. They do actually have the benefit of adding variance, which is the main reason why Riot wants any form of RNG in the game whatsoever. So variance is a word that Riot uses quite a lot, and you could probably think of it as sort of like a scale. At one end of the scale, you have what is maybe the worst possible outcome for any particular feature or mechanic in the game. For example, an ability being used, but not getting anything out of it whatsoever. And then at the other end of the scale, you have the best case scenario. For example, maybe you get like the perfect dragon that spawns and your team gets to take advantage of it, or landing a 5-man stun with an ability instead of just hitting one person. And there's a few different ways that Riot adds variance to League of Legends. So one really easy example is the use of skill shots on abilities instead of making them targeted. So let's say, for example, you're designing a champion. Maybe they have some pretty high damage abilities that you want to balance. If you have a high damage nuke ability that was targeted so that the player only has to click on an enemy to essentially guarantee that damage, the variance on that specific ability is really low, and as a result, potentially makes the ability pretty powerful. Unless the rest of the champion's kit was bad, that champion could potentially have an overpowered spell if the ability just did a lot of damage. The solution here is, of course, to introduce variance. For example, by turning that ability into a skill shot, because now it's no longer a case of a point and click and you do X amount of damage. The player has to predict where the enemy's going to be, correctly aim the ability, and as well the opponent actually has the opportunity to potentially evade the ability to dodge the damage themselves. Heck, maybe like some teammate potentially flashes in front of the ability and just saves their ally or something like that. So instead of having an always best case effect in the targeted scenario, the ability can now either be like a really powerful nuke or just a complete waste of mana, which potentially does balance it out quite nicely. It would be pretty boring if every time you played against a champion you were guaranteed to get smacked around by high damage targeted abilities. But that variance is what keeps things fresh, keeps things interesting, exciting, and makes League of Legends what it is really, and it gives you a chance to play differently from each game to each game, which is a big part of what makes the game fun. There's more than one way to add variance though, and another one, as you probably have guessed by the topic of this video, is of course with randomness. So having at least some form of input and potentially even output randomness, as we discussed earlier, can help keep the game fresh for the same reason that skill shots help keep the game fresh. They introduce variance, things that force changes in your strategy if you want to be successful. It's all about provoking players into doing things differently, to react differently to each game rather than just pre-programmed to knowing what to do. Imagine if in every single game of League you just played the same champion, built the exact same items because they were the only ones available for your champion, instead of being able to maybe react to the enemy team, pick up something like Azonias against Assassins. You were just stuck having to build AP and couldn't do anything when you were getting targeted and insta-gibbed. It's important that players have the tools that they need to make decisions in the game, as well as before the game too, and that's something that variance, and potentially to an extent randomness, can actually introduce. A few seasons ago, there was a popular strategy to use fiddlesticks to rush a really early dragon, back when dragon was giving gold to your team, global gold. So a lot of players would try to do that in almost every single game, which is actually kind of repetitive and potentially annoying to deal with. And elemental drakes are actually a really good solution to this. No one knows before the game which dragon's going to spawn, so you wouldn't just pick a team comp that can cheese an early dragon. You might load into the game and see that it's a cloud drake, maybe not worth your time. Either way, immediately, right away, off the bat, there is some level of variance into any sort of game. It definitely takes a lot of tuning to make sure the randomness isn't too overwhelming and focused on adding variance rather than introducing unfair or frustrating amounts of RNG, but the aim is definitely to keep things fresh and to avoid things from being repetitive. And from that perspective, a little bit of input randomness is potentially really good for the game, honestly. It makes things a lot more playable and gives people a reason to play more than one game a day, keep playing long term, simply because you just never get the same experience twice. And going back to what we originally said about critical strikes, the thing about critical strikes and why they're kind of okay to exist in the game, or at least allowed to exist in the game, is that they really add variance to auto attacks. They make auto attacks do different amounts of damage, so that auto attacks, especially on AD carries who are so heavily based around auto attacks in general, have some sort of variance to their attack patterns. But again, as Riot themselves have said, the real question is, can they be tuned to the point that randomness isn't influencing things too much, or do they need to be removed in favor of an alternate form of variance for auto attack focused champions? And that's probably a topic that's often discussed by Riot themselves, and Riot have also been considering different versions of critical strikes or potentially changing the way crits work, but that's probably going to be a topic for a different video. Either way though, that's just about going to wrap up everything on randomness and variance in League of Legends. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit about the design of RNG and how Riot approaches introducing randomness into their game. Personally, I enjoy these sort of design topics quite a bit, so maybe we'll take a look at some more stuff in the future. Either way though, looks like that's going to be it from me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.